The Prime Minister came here to East London to set out those 5 priorities that you've talked about, really his vision for his government going forward. But he's well aware of what's been happening in the country over the last couple of weeks. We haven't heard too much from the Prime Minister in that last couple of weeks. So before he could actually get to talking about his vision for the future, he knew he would have to address what's been happening in the country right at this moment.
This year has begun much as the last ended. Strikes across the public sector, warnings that the NHS is not coping, and a cost of living crisis which continues to take its toll. So before his longer-term promises, the Prime Minister had to address the current reality with a hint of some movement maybe on the NHS strikes.
We hugely value public sector workers like nurses. They do incredibly important work. And that's why we want a reasonable dialogue with the unions about what's responsible and fair for our country. And in the coming days, we will update you on the government's next steps.
Then it was on to the government's 5 priorities, on which he said the public should judge him.
5 promises. We will halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the boats. Those are the people's priorities. They are your government's priorities, and we will either have achieved them or not.
He wants to change what he called the country's mindset to embrace innovation, and on that he had a specific policy for students in England.
I am now making numeracy a central objective of our education system. Now, that doesn't have to mean a compulsory A-level in maths for everyone. But we will work with the sector to move towards all children studying some form of maths to 18.
Many of the questions put to him went back to the NHS. He said they had found extra money at the last budget for the health service, but it didn't sound like there was a promise of any more anytime soon.
To all those people who are worried about the state of the NHS, to all those people working in the NHS who wonder if it can keep going, are you really saying there's no more money? You've had what you're getting. It's been announced there isn't going to be any more. Now you get on with it. Is that what you're saying, in effect, to them?
It's right that we fund the NHS well, and we are. And that's why, in spite of the difficult decisions we had to make elsewhere, we have found extra money for the NHS and social care. And I think that was recognised by many independent people at the time of the autumn statement, that we had prioritised the NHS, that we had listened and put more funding in. Have a good 2023.
He wants to be judged on the priorities he's set out, but he will also be judged on how he handles the immediate challenges that face his government today.
So, Andy, the Prime Minister has set out those promises, those 5 pledges. How have they gone down?
Well, let's have a look at them one by one. Just 5 to get through. Halving inflation. A lot of projections saying that inflation would be coming down by the end of this year, so maybe that won't be so difficult. Getting the economy growing, well, it's bumping along the bottom at the moment. Again, any kind of growth, maybe the Prime Minister could say, see, I've kept that promise. Getting debt falling as a proportion of GDP, of national wealth. He didn't put any timetable on that, so that may well stretch into the future. So that may be, again, rather difficult to say, look, you haven't met that promise. We'll have to wait and see on that one. Getting waiting lists down in the NHS. Now, on the face of it, that's quite difficult. But again, a few people projecting that waiting lists are very, very high at the moment. Inevitably, they will start coming down towards the end of the year. Perhaps that will make it easier for him to keep that promise. And then the last one on small boat crossings. He said he was promising to legislate to make it harder for small boats to bring people into the UK. He will press ahead with legislation. He'll probably be able to get that through Parliament. So even if that doesn't have the effect of stopping small boat crossings, he may well be able to say, look, I kept my promise to at least get the law changed on that.
And we saw you ask the Prime Minister about nurses. What exactly did he have to say about the NHS strikes that we're going to see this month?
Well, there was no promise of any more money, as he made pretty clear to me in my question. He also didn't say there's a promise of a better formal pay offer to nurses in this dispute. But there was a lot of talk about having, a lot more dialogue. He said we're going to set out our next steps in the next few days. He said that the 19% that the nurses, he said, were asking for was unreasonable, but that was no reason why we couldn't have more conversations about what was springing to people's minds. So while there may not be a formal better offer to nurses in terms of basic pay, feels as if they're looking for other ways to make a better offer more generally in terms of benefits to nurses and other NHS workers, and we should hear from that in the Prime Minister's own words in the next few days.